Welcome, everybody, to the Connor Green Podcast. This is episode 3. I'm here with my co-host,
Paola Osorio.
And today we're going to talk about being in control of your life. That's what we ended up talking about at the end of podcast 2. Like we've mentioned a few times, we only got a half hour, and it's a super strict half hour for us.
Can you explain why we only have half hour?
It's just limitations within our equipment and limitations within our system and time and all of that stuff. And it's hard for us because it feels
we
like...
keep talking.
No, well, it just feels like we're just getting into like the really deep stuff. It takes like a half hour to warm up. But that's okay. So
and I had something to say to Connor as soon as we stopped recording the last episode.
Convenient. So basically... what we were talking about was when you don't want to do anything, when you're feeling depressed, when you can't get to the gym, you're just laying there, you got too much going on, you're overwhelmed, you have tons of anxiety, you're sad. What happens? I was making the point, there's a lot of things we could talk about with this, but what the major point that I was making to Paola is that habit 1 of 7 habits of highly effective people, the most important thing is believing that you are in charge of you. That's the baseline. You have to believe that you are in charge of you fully, 100%. I brought up an example and mentioned that you could starve yourself to death, which is an amazing thing to think about, that you are a living organism that can choose to die. Nothing else can do that. You literally can choose death. That has to be the hardest decision for a living organism that billions of years of evolution has programmed to stay alive. And you can choose to not.
And I said, hold up, wait up a minute. Because you don't know what happened to me, I was not in control of. And that's where I got really upset.
Go ahead, bro. I'm about to set you straight.
I was like,
shit,
this is some bullshit. I said, because I was not in control of what happened.
Okay. Well, what happened?
What I allowed, but then I was in control of how it affected
me.
Do
you see that? You see that,
whatever.
America? You see that, America? Who's ever listening to this? I don't even need to set her straight. It took like 35 seconds and she's saying it now.
So what
but seriously, let's talk about it.
No, the last episode was July 2020.
Okay, July 2020
for
Paola's
me.
199 pounds. She lost 100. Life's going great, and
I just started a relationship, and then 2 of my best friends break up. These are the people that I spent the most time with. These were, I literally, if I wasn't at that point hanging out with Dom, I was hanging out with you guys. Like we pretty much could have lived together at that point. We were cooking together. We were like watching movies together. We're going out to dinner. Like, I think it was, COVID. But we spent so much time together. You know, they went through a breakup and I was fucking devastated. To me, it was my norm. The people that are closest to me, like my world shattered. It really did. And I might cry, so I'm just going to put it out there.
What else is not new?
Shut up. The people I love the most just were not together. Like, what's going to happen? Can I go to the gym? Are they going to get together again? And I got kind of, caught up in some of it. And I was like, what's going to happen? The uncertainty, the fear I gave you space. Like, Connor and I became really good friends. And we say almost like a brother-sister relationship. And I gave him space. I felt like he needed time to kind of, figure things out. To the point where, like, I felt he abandoned me.
But I wonder, did y'all hear that? Y'all hear that?
Bitch, you left me.
I gave him space and felt abandoned.
And you left me, okay?
Oh, my God.
Okay? This is how our Latinas argue.
Oh, Lord. Lord help me.
Later on, we had a conversation about it.
Yeah. What were the consequences of that, though? Since we're talking about falling off and being unable to get back on track.
Right. I mean, I was so sad. I was so depressed. I didn't do anything. I tried to work out for a little bit with someone, and very few people can get through. If I think you're just bullshit, I just won't listen to you as a coach. and I'm not saying this person I was working with was or something, anything wrong with them, but I need to speak to the person that I'm working with. I need to have a connection with the person that I'm working with. And I feel like you have a way of talking to me where you know how to get in, for lack of a better term. I mean, you know how to dig through my own bullshit. But what happened was that I was so distraught. Life stopped. That's what it felt like for me. I wasn't working out. I wasn't doing anything. And I would just cry and lay in bed and say, no one understands. I mean, no one could understand. I think the three of us would understand. But no one understood. I mean, I cried to my boyfriend's mom. And it's so fucking weird. I'm going, it's because Connor. It's because I miss him so much. And they're like, you're dating Dominic. I'm sure this is what they were thinking. But it was so difficult for me to think. And for me, and I don't know if you guys know this, and I've shared this before, like, not Dominic, Connor was the first positive male figure in my life. I love my dad to death. He's a lot better now, but he was a shit show growing up. Like, he's not a man that I can say I looked up to him or he loved me or it was a shit show. So Connor was the first male that came into my life, didn't want anything from me, was just really wanted to help. He showed me what a man should be. I mean, even, anyway, I was like, who am I without this person in my life? Am I capable of doing what I did? Here come the tears, without him in my life.
But this whole thing is
in my head.
Yeah, as sad and as touching as this is hearing, it's mostly made up in your own head.
Yeah.
Because nothing happened between Paola and I. In fact, Paola and I got closer throughout that process in a lot of ways. Brought us closer together. So some of this, one of my favorite quotes by a Stoic philosopher is that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. And so much of this, because I felt your distance, and I totally didn't understand why. At all. I mean, it didn't make any sense to me. And then we get together and talk about it. You left me. Which, you didn't say that. I'm just totally giving.
No, I think I might have said,
Paola.
you abandoned me. I think you said you abandoned me.
I didn't feel like you abandoned me. And
oh, maybe those weren't the words you used.
No, I didn't feel like you abandoned me, but I did think that you chose to leave the gym and do other stuff when you didn't have to.
I didn't know my place.
What do you mean you didn't know your place?
I didn't know if I was still welcome.
Why would you not be welcome? I own the place.
I know, but still, I mean, it was rough. I guess I think for me emotionally, and a lot of it went on in my head.
You flipped out.
I mean, I didn't flip out on you.
No, you didn't flip out like angry. You flipped out internally.
Yes.
And you ran away.
I ran. I hid.
You had discomfort, uncertainty. You had an obstacle and a challenge, and you dipped. That's what happened. She's doing a little celebration dance for anybody listening. But this is
said dip. I was like, when I dip, you dip, we dip. That's what I was.
This is super important to what we were saying. Is things happened that you weren't in control of, except for your response.
Oh, and my response just.
You are always in control of how you respond. That's what you have to believe. Are there certain cases where you're not in control? Like if somebody's torturing you and they stab you, can they make you feel pain? Yes. I already hear people, I'm not into blah, 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 blah. Shut up. Like, you have to believe that you are in control of how you respond. If I put a gun to your head right now and say, stand up, do you have a choice in that? Can you choose to sit?
Yeah.
And what's going to happen?
You're going to shoot me.
But you can still choose to sit, even though I'm going to shoot you if you sit. So this is a scenario, I think, and specifically for Paola, I'm not going to go into like this deep psychoanalysis. But I think that you just had chaos in your life, and this was the first time you had something really consistent in your life that was a really consistent good that was always there for you, and the situation changes. And it was really kind of, it's a naive thing to think, hey, this thing's amazing. It's never going to change. I finally got everything figured out. Because that just life doesn't happen that way. Like relationships always change. Friendships always change. Happy marriages become sad marriages. And the real question, the real key here is, how do you maintain your happiness in spite of life's changes?
And in this situation, my
not
happiness,
making life not change. Sorry.
My happiness was wrapped around my friends.
And you can certainly, and you should have felt all your emotion there. But you're right. You didn't have a purpose in life, a greater purpose in life, a way of living that was at the center, and then things branching off. You had your friends in the gym, and COVID happened. I mean, it's really, if one or the other of those happens, you're probably good, right? But everything happened all at once, and really what we found is you didn't have a solid bedrock. And most people don't have a solid bedrock. I think people try sometimes have a bedrock with like religion. You know, they try to have a bedrock, and I think a lot of people have absolutely zero. But you have to be entirely confident about who you are and the way you live your life, and be determined to be successful and happy in spite of what happens.
And coping skills, that if something does happen. And that's why I'm in therapy now, which is, you know, I tell them everything's fine in my life. I mean, generally speaking, everything's fine.
Yeah, what's wrong with it?
I said, but coping, I don't know how to cope sometimes.
This is do 6 podcasts on this too. Let's talk about coping.
So
how do you cope?
Ice cream. Just kidding.
No, but it's for real. This is a super important thing.
I cope by eating, and like what you just said, just running away.
This is a super important thing for us to talk about, and I think we can frame this discussion a couple different ways. One is building up your ability to handle stress, uncertainty, and discomfort, because everybody feels those things. I'll let people in on a little secret. People that are happy and successful don't just not have that stuff come up. They experience all of that same shit, but how they respond is different. Now, and again, just like basketball, LeBron James has a certain set of tools that not everybody has. But everybody can get better at basketball. Are you going to become LeBron? Probably not. But can you go from terrible to 100 times better at basketball? Yes. Some people are very, very good at being happy, and it comes easily to them. And if they work really hard at it, they can become extremely happy. Some people struggle with happiness, but can get much better. You have to accept where your baselines are and work from there. Instead of going, well, I am the way I am, and then look at somebody that put in an unimaginable amount of work in therapy and journaling and reading and having hard conversations and being uncomfortable and being open to feedback and criticism and making their life better, and being like, they were born that way. And here's the kicker. Who cares if they were born that way? You weren't. You have to change it. It doesn't matter if someone else was born that way. Who cares? It's your life and your responsibility to fix. It might not be your fault. Stuff happens all the time. That's not our fault. Still our responsibility. So in this case, you didn't cope well.
No.
And this is emblematic, truthfully, of a lot of what happened to you when you grew up. You know, I think our parents can instill positive ways of coping in us, of crying, of talking about our feelings, of playing sports, of exercising, of eating healthy, of having good bonds and relationships. And then our parents can be terrible examples for coping by hitting and yelling and screaming and being abusive and scaring children and doing all of these things.
You know what's interesting that you're saying that, and what first thing that popped to my mind was, okay, I literally like to isolate myself in my bedroom.
Safer that way.
Because but you think about it, what did my parents do? Go to your room.
So instead of being there and attending to your emotions, allowing you to have the ability to express yourself, coming to a solution, allowing you to explore your emotions and let them be your own, and them handling your emotions, how did they cope with being uncomfortable? I have a whining, crying kid and I'm pissed off. I can't cope with this. Make it go away. Go to your room.
And I say this respectfully. Like, I love my family.
Of course.
You know, we've there's been a lot of growth. I love them. Our relationship has changed. And to talk about these things, it's not to rehash or say you did this and this is why I'm like this. This is about learning and breaking the cycle.
It is. Here's the thing. You can love your parents and also realize that they had an effect on you. Mm-hmm. And that in order for you to become the healthiest version of you, you need to understand how you got to where you are.
Right.
You know, if you're constantly beaten growing up and you're 25 and you're feeling the consequences of that, how do you get better? By blocking out everything? By being like, well, no, it's not I love my parents. I would not. It's like shit happened to you and it has had an effect. It's not the only reason. It's had an effect on where you are today. And you have to explore that so that way you can be better and live a better life and live a happier life and do things differently. And if you don't look back, you can't. And people have tremendous resistance to that. I'm super open about the things that my parents did that I didn't like at all. My parents did a lot of immature shit, but I also know my parents did a lot of mature stuff.
So when you were a whiny child, how did your parents handle that?
My dad really struggles to handle other people's emotions. Okay. He big time. Like it's kind of like he's turned off to other people's emotions for the most part and just has like, he decides how you should feel and anything else is ridiculous. My mom was way more mature and way more attentive and much, much more able to handle our emotions as kids and talk to us about how we felt. My mom was way easier to talk to. Okay. So luckily for me, I had one parent. Honestly, I had one parent that cared how I felt because I grew up thinking my dad didn't care how we felt. Now, he might hear this and I love you, Dad, but that's just how it feels. Mm-hmm. And my dad, I'm sure he would say, I always cared how you felt and I love you so much. And I know he does and he might care, but I never felt that way. Right. Basically ever. Occasionally here and there, but for the most part, absolutely not. But my mom always cared about how I felt. Always. And I can't imagine what it would have been like having two parents that didn't care how I feel. And the way that my parents handled conflict didn't lend itself. I was super immature, man. I look back into a couple of relationships that I had and always a really nice guy. I always wanted to be a gentleman. Always wanted to be in love. Always wanted a relationship. Always wanted to be respectful, things like that. But there were plenty of times like something would bother me and I just wouldn't say anything. I would just be bothered. You know those situations where it's like your significant other's like, hey, what's wrong? And you're like, nothing. And you're like, no, hey, what's in there? Trying to get you to talk about it. Yeah. Well, what I learned for me is I grew up essentially thinking that when something was wrong, take my father, for example, that he didn't care. So I never said what was wrong. Mm-hmm. And then that transferred into my relationships. Hey, baby, what's wrong? Nothing. Because I couldn't say, hey, this bothers me, Dad, or hey, I feel this way, and be believed or be trusted or talk about it, right? So that was it. But you can also say and know that my parents did the best job they could. My parents did especially my dad, did way, way, way better than their parents did, right? But I also know that for me to get to the level that I want to, I need to be able to recognize the negative behaviors that I was taught when I grew up. That's all there is to it. You have to be able to recognize the negative behaviors that you were taught when you grew up, the negative coping mechanisms. Mm-hmm. Like if your parents didn't care about how you felt and they beat you and they put you in the corner and they never listened to you. And the only thing that made you feel better from the time you were 3 was eating food, and they always made food for you. And you could never say that you were full. You had to finish your plate. If you wanted dessert, you had to force feed yourself to get dessert so you could have something good at the end of learning how to force feed yourself. And now you're an adult with an overeating problem and you've been overweight your whole life. Well, we have to dig into that. You can't just decide to take all of these issues and just run enough to lose weight and be a healthy person. You can't do it. Like, you have to look into why you are the way you are. And to get back to this, before we get too far off track, what we were talking about from, I don't know, first podcast, second podcast right now, is things happened to Paola and she felt like she wasn't in control. And so by default, she chose what was comforting to her, which is being alone and doing nothing. And that is a bad coping mechanism.
Yeah.
And eating, bad coping mechanism.
I mean, it was good at the moment. But.
It felt good, but it was bad. I mean, look what it did, right?
Yeah.
So you have to learn other coping mechanisms. Like, some people drink. Some people get angry. Some people develop sex addictions or drug addictions. Or there are all different types of ways to cope with your stress. But you cannot say, in my opinion, that you have an anxiety issue, a stress issue, a depression issue when something happens to you that you don't like and you cope negatively. Like, you have to find ways, because you have to be in charge. Like, life is way more about how you respond to what happens to you than what happens to you. And there's like this prevailing idea in our culture today that life is all about what happens to you. And it's not. Life is about how you respond to what happens to you. And if you are always responding in a positive way, if you are always taking the high road, if you always have a positive coping mechanism for when something bad happens to you, you're going to be much happier and much more successful than somebody that's think about this. Like, I'm so passionate about this. Like, I'm just going to go off. We might as well just, like, the rest of the 8 minutes of the podcast. I'm sorry. Paola's leaving, guys. It's just me now.
See you later.
Okay. There are people, so many people. There are people that are going to be listening to this podcast. There are people we see every single day. They always respond negatively when something bad happens to them. And they wonder why they're in a bad place. Imagine if you always responded positively when something bad happens. Because guess what? Bad things happen to everybody. The super happy person that you see, the super positive person you see, the super successful person you see, they didn't just not have bad things happen to them. They're happy and successful in spite of the bad things that happen to them. And we don't even have to do all the time. Imagine if 50% of the time something bad happened to you and you responded positively. You broke up, and instead of going out and get absolutely blackout wasted and completely trashed, you reconnected with an old friend. You have stress at work, and instead of coming home and being a tyrant, you went and worked out. You are facing stress in your relationship because you're not sure what's about to happen. And instead of blowing up and being jealous or being insecure, you wrote about it. And you took that journal to a therapist. You're overwhelmed by something because you have too much going on. And instead of trying to distract yourself by that, by going out and partying on Saturday night, you went to bed early. Imagine, these things have compounding interest. It's a little investment over a long period of time. That's how the shit changes. It's not miraculous, crazy change. It's not all of a sudden you wake up, you had an epiphany. That's bullshit. That stuff doesn't happen. Maybe it does happen. 1 in a trillion, but that's what we see in the movies. That's what we see online. It doesn't happen that way. Unless you really are 1 in a billion, but there's only 7 of us. Almost everybody that has a significant life change makes tiny investments over a long period of time. Can you make bigger investments? Sure. But the most important thing is investing consistently over a long period of time. That's the only fucking way. That's it. That's the only way. You cannot go. Listen, I was telling you this the other day, okay, and I'm almost at the end of this of my monologue for the podcast, so bear with me, okay? But I was telling Paola the other day, she was like, I just want to lay there. I just want to lay there. Yeah. And you chose to lay there. So walk through me with this, okay? So I had a rough day. I'm going to watch 6 hours of Netflix. Your average person watches 4 hours of TV a day, by the way. And I think your average person is also completely disillusioned about how much time they actually spend watching TV, okay? Everybody and their mama, I binge watch this, I binge watch this, I binge watch this. Not a good thing. Newsflash, binge is not a good word to be using for anything, okay? But here we go. Paola goes, I don't want to do anything.
Just like that.
I don't want to do anything. Goes, gets up, walks out of the bedroom, picks up the remote, sits down on the couch. You know what you could have done with exactly the same amount of energy? Walk out of the bedroom, pick up your car keys, and sit in your car.
When was this? I don't remember.
You must not have been listening. It's been known to happen. Okay, no, but seriously, that takes the same amount of energy, the same amount of effort. You rolled out of bed, you picked up the remote, you sat on the couch. You rolled out of bed, you picked up the keys, you sat in the car. Now you take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes flipping through the channels, trying to find something to watch. You find something to watch, turn it on, kick back. Okay, take this. You're in the car sitting. It takes zero effort to sit in the car, zero. And the way that a lot of y'all drive, I know it's just like flipping channels, not paying attention at all, especially the way you drive.
No, we're not talking about that.
I've never been in more danger than when driving with Popo.
Connor doesn't know where he's going. Okay, don't even get me started.
Part of another podcast, but I'm for real. You know how much people tune out when they're driving?
Yeah.
It's like a mindless activity. No more than trying to find something on Netflix. Except while you took 10 minutes to find the perfect TV show to binge watch for the next 6 hours, you took 10 minutes and you drove to the fucking gym. And now you're at the gym. Now what? Well, you're sitting on the couch. You got to eat something. You need the comfort. So what do? You get up, you walk in the kitchen, you open the refrigerator door, you throw something in the microwave, you wait your 3 minutes, you get your food, you sit down. Or even more than that, you pay your $30, you wait 45 minutes to DoorDash a pizza. How much more effort does it take to get out of the car and walk into the gym? And once you get, don't answer it. Yeah, she went to try to answer it. Hypothetical, it's a rhetorical question. And once you walk into the gym, you won. You won. Nobody walks into the gym and walks out. Once you get there, you won.
Stop calling me out, Connor.
It's not just you. It's a lot of people. Like, you have to choose, and that's what we were talking about. That should have been a whole other podcast, is you chose to lay down. You chose to watch the TV. You chose to watch the Netflix. You made all those choices, and you could have just as easily made other choices.
In that
you could have made other choices.
And I agree. In that moment, though, if you can relate to me, I'm not saying that
I can relate to you.
Obviously. If you can relate.
Hold on. Don't think for 1 second. Don't think for 1 second. I haven't been confronted by those same choices, by those same feelings, because I have, and it's been bad.
In that moment, you just feel like you have no other choice, but
because you don't believe you're in control.
And this is why I'm going to therapy, trying to change the way my brain works. My therapist said you have certain blueprints that we need to either get rid of or modify.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And one of them is how I cope with things and how things just kind of get blown out of proportion in my brain, because I feel like, oh my God, you think I'm fucking disabled that I can't get out of bed.
Mentally.
But it's not really. No, it is.
Emotionally, I guess.
But I know so many people that struggle with this, Connor.
Yeah.
I know so many
That's why
people.
we're talking about it. That's why we're talking. It needs to be talked about.
And when you explain to somebody else, oh, you're fucking lazy, you're that.
Has nothing to do with laziness.
No. And I think this is kind of
I won't say nothing. Sometimes it does.
Into the next podcast that we're going to record is, you talked about building those small habits, because motivation is bullshit. We've talked about this.
It's like being hungry. It comes and goes.
Yeah. Comes and goes. But you told me you need a series of wins. Paola, he was talking to me here in the apartment. He goes,
get some momentum.
Get some momentum. And you are going to be back to that skinny badass bitch, which is what I want to be again.
You said bad tiny bitch.
I can't remember.
Coming up on our time limit here. I'd love to have questions on the podcast.
Yeah.
Yo, if you listen to this, submit some questions. Hit me up on Instagram, text me, email me. Same thing for Paola. I'm at Connor J Green. We have at Lipsticks and Barbells.
Yep.
Please reach out again. Share this if this is something that you like, you appreciate. Hey, you might not like it. I can give the tough love, but it is love though. So I do love you. I want you to live a better life. It wakes me up every single morning. The thought of helping people, leaving a legacy, helping someone have a slightly better life. So we really, really care about this. Please share it. Please keep listening, and we will see you on the next episode.